Solange, thank you so much for agreeing to have a quick chat to us about your chapter in the Team Coaching Casebook. And I guess I'd like to really kick us off with, we were having an interesting conversation before we started pressing record here about systems and tools and what's been happening in the team coaching industry over the last number of years since you wrote the chapter. So I don't know if we want to pop into that, but definitely want to cover that at some stage. But I guess I'm curious just to sort of whet the appetite of people watching, like what is unique about your chapter in the book? You know, what was compelling for you to write the chapter in the first place?
So Tammy, thank you for having me as part of this process. I'm very excited to speak about my chapter and what I've learned since the time that the chapter was written and the book was published. For me, I wrote the chapter with a view to highlighting an experience that didn't live up to the expectation that either I had or the sponsor who had engaged me to do the team assessment and the team coaching. And I think it's really important that we don't just show the big successes, but we also show things that can go wrong in a team coaching assignment, or things that, in my instance, the assignment wasn't complete. It ended early. And so I think the value of my chapter in the book is to highlight the things that could possibly go wrong, so that team coaches are prepared for the eventuality that things don't go exactly as planned. And with a rigorous approach, and I am a data analyst at heart, so everything I do has data underneath it, so everything is grounded in data and data evidence, that even a less than stellar coaching assignment can actually still generate positive outcomes for the coach, the team participants, the organization, and even the coach. So that was my sort of goal in writing this chapter, is to actually highlight something that went sideways so that the reader can learn to look for the signs that might predict a bad or a less than expected team coaching engagement.
Absolutely. I love what you're talking about here, because I don't think that there's any of us who have ever, who've been coaching for a long time anyway, who've gone through an assignment where everything went perfectly. Number one, does it? If you do, you're probably not doing the job, in my opinion, especially from a supervisory perspective, because I see lots of other people's work. But also, like, especially if we take the pandemic, like how many people literally had engagements end in the middle when people were not finished? Or, like that's a really huge example of it. But, there's always reorgs or leaders leaving, or, team loses momentum, or board comes in and says, you got to do something different. So right. I love that. So thank you for doing that and being sincere.
My pleasure. In my instance, the organization was a pharmaceutical company that was global. And many of the things you said actually happened. So the sponsor, the CEO of the company, actually was the president, was, and this was a Japanese organization, was a Japanese national who was going back to Japan. So he knew that he wasn't going to be around for the end of the engagement. And he purposely excluded himself from the team coaching sessions because he felt that he wasn't going to be able to stay until the end of the series of interventions of coaching sessions, number one. And number two, and I don't know that I agree with him on this, that his direct reports needed to learn how to work with each other more effectively without him being there. And you started this by saying that we're looking at systems, right? Which is the big difference between individual coaching and team coaching. Individual coaching is really one-on-one coaching. And what's interesting for me is individual coaching happens in the context of the relationship between the coach and the coachee, right? So there's no coaching if the coach isn't there. So it's really coach dependent. In team coaching, the coach is really on the sidelines. The coach observes and the coach intervenes to help the team do better at relating to one another and expressing their own personal opinions. So on one-on-one, it really isn't about a system. It's about a relationship. But team coaching really is at the systems level, right? So the unit of analysis, if we want to get academic, the unit of analysis for individual coaching is the individual. The unit of analysis for team coaching is team. And team is a system. And so it's really important to understand that it is a system. It's important to understand that the team does need to learn the skills and the approaches and the sensitivity, you might want to call it EQ, to observe the other in relationship to the system. And I think that's what makes, for me, team coaching really interesting, because you're not getting into the mind of the individual that you're coaching. You actually have to understand the system that's at work, both at the enterprise level and at the team level, to be able to coach effectively for that team to improve its collective performance. I think that's the biggest, for me, that's the biggest distinction between individual coaching and team coaching. And not to be a cynic or anything, but I don't want to be negative either, but I have a hard time accepting when an individual coach says, oh, I can do team coaching, right? Because it's not about group coaching. It's not about, oh, I'm going to do individual coaching for a bunch of people at the same time. It's really coaching to the system. And it requires a different type of skill set and a different type of sensitivity to be successful as a team coach than an individual coach. And hopefully the profession has evolved over the last several years, where individual coaches are not saying, oh yeah, I can be a team coach. Right. Well, without some training and or supervision, which I was really delighted to see that the professional bodies, all of them, are now in agreement about, you're working in a systemic level, you need to go get supervision, which is a systemic frame to look at your work. Exactly. So go ahead. I was going to interrupt and say, one of the things that your case really highlights is the need for measurement. And I know in teaching team coaches and or through supervision, what have you, but this is the number one question on people's mind is, how do we actually measure success of team coaching? Or how do we know that we're making impact to the system? Or what are some of the metrics that we need to be looking for? So I thought that might be an interesting next step. Is that okay? Or did you have more to say on the other thing? No, I was actually going to say that's why I believe that having some type of an assessment tool is so critical, because you are measuring the system. And the tool that I used and described in the chapter is the tool that I created in my PhD research. The assessment tool is unique in that, and this is what you should look for in any team assessment, is that the assessment tool itself is measuring the system, not the individuals, and then aggregating individual responses. So again, if you have an assessment tool that measures the individual and their own, where, let's put it this way, where the scale items have the word I in it, then the respondent is reflecting inwardly, right? So they're thinking about what I do, right? How I feel, how I respond. A team assessment focuses the individual to the team. So the focus is outside of the individual. It is we or the team, and it puts the locus outside of the individual, not inside the individual. So we see a lot of times individual assessments aggregated to reflect the team, but that's not accurate, because you're just getting a bunch of individual perspectives about themselves in relationship to the team. You are not getting the view outside of the individual about the team itself. And so if you're using an assessment tool, you should look for those words, we, the team, and the focus is outside of the person. The I assessments brings the focus back in. And then it's not measuring what's happening at the system level, it's measuring what's happening at the individual level.
Yeah.
So my instrument, all the items are externally focused. And what the instrument does, because every team is different, every dynamic is different, the instrument captures the current experience of team for the team member, and it also captures the aspirational. So how am I experiencing the team today versus how do I think the team should be for the team to be successful? And that's where we actually are able to capture the gap. So teams whose aspiration is close to the actual experience. And this is what my research shows, is when that gap is small between the way it is today and the way that we think it needs to be successful in the future. When that gap is small, we have high functioning teams. We have teams that are actually performing at their aspirational level. And when that gap is large, we have a dysfunctional team, because the way they are is not the way they think they should be for the team to be successful.
Right.
So it's not the assessor saying, oh, on active listening, you should be a 4.7, right? And then measuring where the team is, because that doesn't help. That doesn't reflect the system. It reflects somebody's opinion about the system. We let the team say what they believe is the ideal way that should be experienced for a high performing team. So the team says we should be at a 4.7 and we're actually at a 4.4. So there's a gap there, right? Is the gap big enough for the team to be dysfunctional? Well, what I found in my research is that when the gap is between 12 to 15%, in terms of the difference between actual and ideal or current and aspirational, we're on the verge of dysfunction. So anything greater than a 15% gap is noticeable. So where does the 15% come from? Historically, and I'm an ex-Hay group person, so this is how I learned it, is that the distinction between steps in the Hay system is 15%, because that is the point in time when the human brain can actually detect a difference. And how did they learn that? They put people in rooms and they measured the point at which they noticed the light changing or colors changing. And it always starts at about 15%. So there's something wired in us that says, oh, I notice something's different when the difference becomes about 15%. And that was proven out in my research as well.
Interesting. It's like we're hardwired at 15%. Hey?
Yeah, pretty much.
How cool. Well, you talked a little bit about kind of your safe to fail sorts of things that happen in the chapter. I don't necessarily want to go into those details because people can read the chapter to get that. But I'm curious about linking like what you learned and, you know, the measurement or the gap or what have you in that, because, you know, I'm imagining if I was listening to us, I would be thinking, okay, so here's an expert on measurement, has their own tool, etc. How come the thing failed? Like, you know, what went on there, right? So sorry to be a little tough, but I think that's what people are going to want to know, right?
Yeah. So the measurement didn't fail. The team coaching failed. Right. It failed for a couple of reasons. One, I already alluded to, is that the team sponsor, the president of the organization, the leader of the team, refused to be part of the team coaching. And I think that it's really important that when you have a team, that the team leader participates, because you need somebody. And the way that we do team coaching is we work on a project. So when the team coaching starts, the team selects the project that they're going to work on, where the team coach is going to be involved. So this was the CEO's direct report. So these were all people who ran their own departments. And they have an agenda of things that they have to accomplish as an organization. And they identified one specific initiative that they were all working on together at that level. So what happens is we set a time for them to work on that project. So if they have a weekly meeting or if they have meetings every 2 weeks on that particular project, that's when the team coach comes in, right? So it's important that the team leader is there to actually contribute to the thought process, the cognitive input into the team project. So that was one thing that was missing, is that we didn't have the final say-so. They were working together with the team coach, observing and coaching, but they had to present everything they did to the CEO, and he either approved or he made changes. So that's the first thing that was the disconnect, is that we didn't have the decision maker in the room, and that's just the second thing that didn't go exactly right was that none of the team members really wanted to engage in team coaching. So they all had an individual coach that was provided by the company. They didn't want a team coach. And this was a particularly dysfunctional team, right? If you read the chapter, you'll see that they were super dysfunctional. The rest of the organization was pretty much okay, because when we assessed the executive management team, and then we assessed every team in the organization, because what we were trying to figure out was, where's the problem coming from? Because the company was having a hard time meeting its goals, keeping to project plan schedules. They had high attrition. They had low employee morale. So the company was not functioning well. And the CEO wanted to figure out what was the root cause of the problem. And so we evaluated every team in the organization. And then we evaluated the C-suite team. And what we found is that this dysfunction came from the C-suite team, which was also kind of interesting because it was multicultural. So we had Japanese people on the team. We had Indian people on the team. We had Europeans on the team. We had Americans on the team. And each culture has a different view of team coaching and even individual coaching. And so they were resistant to it. Intellectually, they understood that it would be good for them, but they didn't want it. They didn't want to be observed. They didn't want to be coached. So that's, I think, the second sort of warning signal is that.
So team readiness.
Team readiness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, they participated. They filled out the assessment tool. They showed up for the meetings. They participated, but they resented it. You could tell that they resented it. They actually vocalized that they didn't want to do this. I mean, we didn't have any silent checker-outers. They were verbal about the fact that they didn't want this. And the only reason that they were doing it is because the president of the company was making them do it. Right. So guess what happened the day that he left?
They all opted out.
They stopped. They said, we want to cancel the team coaching. I did get them to agree to a post-coaching assessment. So they fill out the same assessment tool post-coaching. And they agreed to allow me to debrief them on the post-coaching results. And what we found was the team improved. Even if they went into it kicking and scratching,
wow.
They actually improved. And they said in the post coaching debrief, they all said that the coaching actually helped them. It helped them better understand the system. It helped them better get along with each other better. It helped them gain a sensitivity and an understanding of the other in terms of, how they related to one another on the team. And so even though we weren't able to complete the coaching assignment, we actually did have a success because they improved and they acknowledged their own personal improvement and the improvement of the team and how they felt about being on the team. So nobody wanted to be on that team. They didn't like each other. It's the first time I've been on a team where nobody on the team liked each other. And by the end of we did 7 sessions with them, you could see that they were talking to each other. They were socializing even before the meeting started. They were in groups of 2 and 3 before the meeting started, just talking to each other, which was a big change from pre-coaching where nobody talked to each other. They came in the room, they sat down, and they didn't talk to each other. So you have to look for the small victories. So in addition to understanding from a quantitative perspective whether or not the team coaching is effective, which shows up in those assessments, right? So we were able to say you had a gap of 40% over in this measure, and, I measure 21 attributes of team. So, you have a gap of 40 or 50% in some measure at the beginning of the coaching session. And at the end of the coaching, you have a gap of, 15%. So you can see that there's improvement and alignment. And the way, because the coach doesn't assign the aspiration, the team assigns the aspiration. So sometimes important. The aspiration gets dampened a little bit, right? More realistic. Sometimes the actual comes much closer to the original aspiration, but there's more alignment in the team. So we measure the team itself, but it's really important, and I can't emphasize this enough, it's really important to measure what happens at the organization level, especially when you're coaching senior level teams. So some of the things that we saw 6 months later, because I was engaged by the CHRO, who was still with the company even after we finished the coaching assignment. We went back to him about 6 months later, and we said, how has the company changed? And these are the things that he said. Their overall employee engagement scores went up. The overall culture, feel, work environment, climate of the organization felt a lot more relaxed. I think that happened because, to use a family analogy, when mom and dad are fighting, the kids feel it, right? They're stressed and anxious. And when mom and dad are getting along, the family feels better. And in this instant, the C-suite executives were getting along better. They were talking to each other. So there was more cross-functional communication, which made it easier for their teams to talk to one another. So it just felt more relaxed in terms of a culture, and the employee engagement scores improved because of it. Absenteeism dropped. And in this instance, it dropped about 30% per month. So people were stressed out. They were taking mental health days. They were not showing up for work. That stopped. Or it got curtailed by 30%, which is great because when people are on the job, they're working. When they're absent, no productivity is happening. Attrition declined, right? People are happier. They're more relaxed. They're not leaving. And we actually calculated the cost avoidance associated with lower attrition, and the organization saved about $300,000 in 6 months post-coaching in headhunting fees, recruiting costs, and lost productivity. So,
Nice.
Measure that. Their Glassdoor scores went up in the 6 months post-coaching. They went from 2.7 to 3.1. And if you're familiar with Glassdoor, if you're below 3 on the Glassdoor, and this is Lori Bassey's research, if you're below 3 on the Glassdoor rating, the trend is you're losing profitability, right? Your profitability is dampened. If you're above 3, it's accretive. It contributes to profitability. So they went from 2.7, which is, detracting from profitability, to 3.1. So we got them over that hump. The percent of missed deadlines in their project management Gantt chart went way down. So they were working as a team. The whole organization was much more successful in meeting deadlines. And the CHRO and the CFO, based on the improvement in meeting project deadlines, estimated that had a positive impact of about $1.5 million to the organization.
Wow.
So that was important. And they weren't making their goals that were set by Japan. And 6 months after the coaching, they were actually making their financial goals. So they were able to go to Japan for I think they were doing quarterly meetings with more pride, right? And more confidence, because they weren't the underdog anymore. They were actually meeting goals. And then the CHRO and I estimated what the return on investment on the fees that they paid for the assessment and the coaching. And the ROI calculation was about 425%.
Wow,
so for
that's
every
awesome.
dollar, for every dollar they invested in coaching, they got $425 back in profit. And I think that in today's age, where everyone's thinking about budgets and everyone's, especially in HR, where there has to be more transparency about return on investment, that's a big win. When a coach, either an individual coach or a team coach, can say, I'm improving productivity, I'm improving profitability, I'm reducing absenteeism, I'm reducing attrition because of the things that I'm doing as an intervention for the organization, has a positive ROI. Who's not going to buy that? What CFO is not going to say, 425% return on investment? Oh no, we don't want that, because they can't get that kind of a return anywhere else in the company.
Nice.
So
Love that.
again, data, calculating financial impact or impact at the enterprise level, not just at the HR level or the team level, I think is going to be key going forward. And I think that's what convinces organizations that team coaching, and even individual coaching for that matter, is a good investment.
Yeah, nice. Well, I know we've run a little bit over time here, and I'd love to kind of wrap this up to let you go. But in wrapping up, you brought up such a great point here about that link between like what the organization needs and how do we measure that ROI. And many individual coaches do not know how to do that, and or many people in the industry have come from other backgrounds other than consulting, whereas team coaching is, in my opinion, my biased opinion, by the way, is kind of a blend between consulting and coaching, and or a blend between consulting and facilitation and coaching, depending on what the engagement looks like. Or even in your case, you're talking a lot about sort of a strong HR and an OD sort of a background might be required as well, right? So what would you suggest for those of us who have not come from that background? What tools do we need to start looking at? Can we get your tool? What sorts of measurements? How do we partner with other people if we don't feel comfortable in doing that? Is that a good place to leave it?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can definitely use my tool. Just reach out, call me, write me an email, link into me on LinkedIn. You can read about the tool in the chapter, and then I can walk you through how the tool gets used. So that's one way of quantifying impact, quantifying the coach's performance is at the team level. If you want to understand all the other things that I talked about, right? Reduction in absenteeism, how do we cost that out? Cost avoidance in terms of reduced attrition, higher levels of productivity. That's essentially what I do for a living. So what I do is I take human capital and I turn it into financial metrics so that CFOs and CEOs and boards of directors can actually understand how human capital is driving corporate financial performance. And there are lots of things that we can measure specifically to the team. So if it's a sales team or an R&D team or, a customer service team, we have lots of measures that we can use, that it has to reflect the team. So think about it that way. Think about what is the team supposed to generate in terms of results or outcomes. And then that will give you some idea of how to measure the team in terms of KPIs, key performance indicators, and then how to relate or correlate the achievement of those team-based measures to enterprise level outcome like HCROI and HCVA. And if those terms aren't familiar to you, you can either visit my website, you can contact me, and you can get the book where we talk about it. And I used to have a book on my desk, but
and then when you're being interviewed, it's not there.
Exactly. It's called Humanizing Human Capital, and it's all about looking at the system, identifying what the right KPIs are and for the HR performance, and then the right financial indicators for the enterprise. And I probably shouldn't be pushing my book when you're pushing the team coaching book, but they're completely different, and it will help you dots.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Do you want me to press pause for a second here so you can get the book?
Sure.
Okay. All right. There we go. There's the book.
Humanizing Human Capital. invest in your people for optimal business returns. So we connect the dots between what happens in HR and what happens on financial statements. And if you're in Europe, you're going to be looking at this as part of the ESRS S1. If you're in the United States, you're going to be looking at this as part of the SEC new disclosure requirements that are coming out later this year. The genie is out of the bottle. HR is going to have some financial rationale and justification, and this is one way of doing it.
Awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure and delight. I've learned heaps myself, so that's always lovely. And thank you so much for your generosity. I know it's been a little bit longer than what we agreed to, so I really appreciate that.
Okay. Thank you very much.